Now.
Okay. As you'll see from your program, the next part of it was Pat Jackson from Jackson and Wagner live, and he was going to show you how you don't really have to have a crystal ball to plan your future strategy. Unfortunately, because of an unexpected client commitment, he is once more on one of his far-flung journeys throughout the United States. And so instead of scratching the session, we decided we would use modern technology, and we now give you
issue anticipation, or how an issue gets to be one. My thesis is that about 90% of the issues that beset us as practitioners are brought on by our activities or by the policies of our organizations. There are really two ways, I think, that we go about doing this. Our policies and activities are out of tune with the court of public opinion. That is to say, we really don't earn public consent for what we're doing in a positive, active way. Or we feel that we must respond to every criticism of those policies and activities so that what wouldn't be an issue becomes an issue, not because of the critics, but because of our inability to discipline ourselves as to how we deal with the criticisms that in fact are essential in the democratic society. I've done no formal study of this, I admit. I'm talking from 25 years of practice in New Hampshire and across the United States and Canada, and I'm also talking from literally thousands of case studies that we've reviewed at PR Reporter and Channels, and when I was teaching at Boston University and elsewhere, plus the ones that all of us as practitioners are aware of on a daily basis. The most basic underpinnings of our field actually hint at what I'm talking about, however, without a formal study. For example, if you take the basic formula for public relations, P plus R equals PR. As you know, the P stands for performance, the R stands for recognition. And if we get positive recognition for good performance, we will indeed have effective public relationships. I have a hunch, and I don't think you'll disagree with this, that we as practitioners have tended to concentrate here on the R, getting recognition for our organizations, their policies and actions. In fact, sometimes, if we were really honest, we would have to admit that maybe the P, the performance, doesn't deserve the kind of recognition that is sought for it. Clearly, given that kind of a disjointed situation, where the R is greater than the P, it stands to reason we're going to invite criticism. When we do that, then we face the second part of my thesis, which is that we over-respond. Maybe we need to look at public relations in a different way. I was in a meeting the other day, and someone not a professional, which I thought interesting, explained public relations in a way that was new to me. Maybe it's old hat to you, but I had never heard it. This is what they said. They said PR means people remember. People remember. People do remember. And I think that's at the root of most of the issues that we get involved in. There are, in fact, 4 types of issues. Let me just zip these up here for you. The first kind of issue might be called a latent issue. It's a possible confrontation, a possible disagreement. It's out there, but it's just latent. Nothing has happened yet. Still, as practitioners, we ought to know about it, because after an issue is latent, there's always the possibility that it may become an emerging issue. Of course, an emerging issue we've heard a lot about, and I'm going to talk about that in detail in a moment. After an issue emerges, reaches a certain level of discussion and support, visibility, then of course we have a hot or current issue. Now I think these are the 3 that we've tended to know about and think about. We're discovering, I think all of us, that there is a 4th category of issues, and we really need to give it special attention. Those are corollary or fallout issues. You know, we settle the hot issue and we think the job is done. And yet, what we're learning is that from every hot issue, a number of unresolved details or unresolved aspects become fallout issues, and we're starting all over again. Clearly, if we can learn to do a better job of resolving these issues to the satisfaction of almost everyone, we can avoid starting the process over with fallout issues. But what is an issue? First of all, an issue has to affect a large number of people. Secondly, clearly there have to be two opposing sides, or in our modern political debates, I think you'd have to say there may be 6 opposing sides. Generally, an issue is also characterized by being an emotional battle. What is a crisis, then, if this is an issue? Because a crisis is different than an issue. A number of legitimate issues will be debated in the court of public opinion. They may be a little emotional, there will be opposing sides, a lot of people will be involved, but in our best democratic traditions, we will solve those issues. But some issues become a crisis. In fact, Grant Horn, with a bank on the West Coast, who's an expert in this subject for his employer, says that a crisis is an issue that gets out of hand. And generally they get out of hand in a number of ways. First of all, the organization that is defending against the issue, or perhaps the activists, the opposition group that are pushing the issue, feel it's a turning point. It's a turning point either in the life of the organization, in the subject matter, or perhaps for the opponents. It's potentially very damaging. This isn't just an issue that you win or lose and you alter your way of operation accordingly. This is one that can do very great structural damage. Thirdly, the emotional battle that characterized an issue now becomes a life or death struggle. It's a real conflict. It's a war. There's a sense of anxiety and dread about the whole subject. And of course, what was once a polite democratic discussion has now become an adversarial atmosphere. What can we do about this? What do we know as practitioners? I'm glad, personally, in my practice, that we know a great deal. One commentator says there are 3 immediate steps that each of us should take for our organizations. First, we should have ready a list, a definition of what an issue, and particularly what a crisis, is apt to be for our organizations. What are the ingredients in this particular area for our particular organization? Secondly, if we can remember that a crisis by its very nature yearns for a resolution, wants to be resolved, we then can have ready, before the issue even hits, certain strategies that we may follow given the level of intensity of the issue or the type of the issue. And thirdly, as a tactical matter, we can remember that resolution means some kind of mediation, of people coming to accommodation with one another. As Eddie Bernays has told us, a public relations practitioner is a societal technician that has the skills to bring about accommodation. Notice that word, accommodation, in the court of public opinion. This is the kind of mediation that I'm talking about. Now, this mediation will probably take form along a certain number of questions. One of them is, can I persuade you to change your mind? Another is, are there points on which you may be able to persuade me to change my mind? Are there points that can be dismissed, that both of us agree those are just minor, they were sort of tossed in to aid the discussion, and now we're going to get those dismissed? Are there points on which we can agree? Is it possible we can find some platform for agreement? And then, having taken care of those 4 questions, now we get down to the nitty-gritty, and we ask that final question. What are the points on which there is total and unalterable disagreement? Once we have resolved what those are, then we can begin mediating. We can go to work in earnest. As practitioners, to prepare our organizations for issues and crises, there are really 3 questions that we can be sure the public is going to ask us. The first is going to be, what happened? Why did this issue arise? Was there some particular event that has brought it out? And if so, how do you explain that? Is it some long-standing policy? And if so, how did that policy arise? What seems terribly wrong or irrelevant today, did it start out as a perfectly reasonable thing? The second question is, why didn't you tell us about this sooner? If it's come to be an issue now, somebody must have known about it. And so why didn't you tell us about this? This may seem like an unfair question, but in fact, if you think about some of the issues you've been involved in, or issues that have taken a great deal of public discussion recently, you'll know that that question is inevitably asked. And then there's that third question, the one that we really need to be prepared for. Why didn't you solve this before it ever became an issue? In a funny kind of a way, this subject that I'm calling issues anticipation looks in both directions. It not only asks us, therefore, to look into the future and see what might be the issues of tomorrow and to prepare for them, but it also asks us to take a look backward, because recently we've seen a great deal of reinvented history of activities which were perfectly all right 20 years ago, which we have been pursuing, and which now all of a sudden become the subject of criticism and become an issue. So we need not only to look into the future, we need to look at the history of our organizations and see how history might be reinvented. And in those two ways, we can indeed begin to anticipate issues. There are four basic rules, if you can call them that the behavioral sciences give us to start establishing strategies and tactics to deal with whatever issues may arise for our organizations. The first comes from sociology. It's that basic rule of abuse. The sociological idea that any change in the relationship between two organizations is the result of an abuse on the part of one. Now, it shouldn't be too difficult for us to look at our organizations and the various publics, the various stakeholders that are involved in the operation of that organization on a day-to-day basis, and to ask ourselves, what are real historical abuses that existed? What are present items of discussion within the organization or between the organization and its publics that might be seen or perceived as abuses? And then what might we do in the future that various publics would see as actual abuses and begin an issue around? That's the first rule of preparation. The second comes to us from psychology. It's the rule of participation based on the psychological principle that people will get behind those decisions, and only those decisions, that they have had a voice in shaping. If your organization, or my organization, is not inviting participation in its decision-making, we can be sure that there are going to be issues around those policies which are made in a closed or dictatorial fashion. It's the nature of American society today. The third rule also comes from psychology, and it's the rule of reward. This one primarily applies to our internal publics, although it also applies, I think, to customers and other external publics. The rule, simply stated, is that people will do that for which they are rewarded, and they will ignore other things. So often, issues arise because people in an organization are asked to do things as part of the onward thrust or the goals of that organization for which they really are not rewarded. It's not part of their job description, they're not evaluated against it, and needless to say, those things don't get done. The result is an issue arises, criticism results. If we remember this rule, we can stop that. The fourth rule from the behavioral sciences comes to us from anthropology, and it is the rule of cheerleading. That no successful society that the anthropologists have uncovered anyway has ever existed without some very active motivational work, some cheerleading. This doesn't just mean we must be cheerleading within our organizations, but we must be reminding our stakeholder publics of what we're doing for them, of how it's in their benefit. And unless we do that, we can be sure they'll lose sight of those benefits. Criticisms and issues are then sure to arise. If you are faced with an issue, what are the choices available to you? I think there are about 3 roads that we can take. First, we can